Today is August 30th, 1995, and we're getting testimony from Diana Weinstock. Her name at birth was Gottlieb. The interview will be conducted by Hillary Hellstein. We're in Los Angeles, California, United States of America, and it will be in English.
That's much better.
It is August 30th, 1995. I'm interviewing Diana Weinstock. I'm Hillary Hellstein. We're conducting the interview in Los Angeles, California, United States of America, in the English language. Can you please tell me your full name now and your name at birth, including your maiden name?
I'm Diana Weinstock. My maiden name was Gottlieb, born Diana Gottlieb.
When were you born? What's your birth date and where were you born?
My birth date is August 7th, 1923, in Radom, Poland.
Diana, can you tell me a little bit about your background, about your childhood growing up in Radom?
Well, I'm the eldest of 3 children. I have 2 brothers. My brother Nathan is 2 years and 3 months younger than I am. My brother Eliyahu, my baby brother, is 9 years younger than I am. We had a wonderful home, wonderful set of parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, and we were extremely close with them while living in Radom. My mother was not a Radomer. Her family lived between Lodz, Poland, and Antwerp, Belgium, so I did not know this part of family as well as my father's.
What's your mother's
family.
name? What was your mother's name?
My mother, Helena Dobrzyńska. She had 13 siblings. She was the 13th out of 14 children. So that's quite a family. My father had 3 brothers and 1 sister.
And your father's name?
Israel Eliezer, in Polish, Leon. My son Leo is named after him, my eldest.
Tell me a little about your relationship with your parents and what they did, what your father's occupation was.
My mother was a homemaker and a mother, which is very unpopular nowadays. That's who she was, a loving mother. My father was an industrialist with his father in business. They had a foundry. And my 2 uncles were all partners. My grandfather died. They built their own factory, while before that they were leasing one. And that was in existence even under communist Poland, of course without Jewish help. We were dispossessed. And right now it's all destroyed, which wouldn't have been ours anyway. As I mentioned, my father was very close to his family, especially his partners, brothers, who were all married and had children. They're all gone. Would you like me to tell you about the way my father perished, or the rest of the family? That will continue.
We'll hold on to that for a little while. I want to hear a little bit more about what it was like for you as a young girl in Radom, and your relationship with your parents and your brothers, and what your home life was like.
Well, home life was
religious
very,
life.
very normal. Like all children growing up with loving care. Most children did. In a religious home. Shabbat was observed. Beautiful holidays were observed. Again, amidst family, which was so very important. I was very fond of my grandfather, Eli Gottlieb, because I drew a lot of inspiration from him. I was in his house quite often. His regret was that I was not born a boy, because I observed so much and absorbed from him. This was the spirit of this era, obviously. I was sitting on his lap until his death. I was 8 years old. I remember him vividly. This inspiration I try to give to my children. I went to public school, regular public school, where we were only 7 Jewish girls. It was all female, while other schools were co-ed, but mine was all female. Then I transferred to a Hebrew high school, even before high school age, where I learned Hebrew literature, Hebrew language, which not very much remained with me till this day. I do understand quite a bit, and of course I can read. We got wonderful education. There are a few survivors from my class, and we keep very close touch with them. Some live in Israel, some in the States, and we are very, very close. Well, all this was interrupted by the war, obviously, but I do remember belonging to a Zionist organization, Masada, youth organization, where I learned more about Zionism than in our high school. School was called Friends of Knowledge. Of course, a Polish name for it. Our standard was extremely high because it had to be under state supervision, state of Poland. And our standard had to be even higher than the regular Polish schools. So a lot of it remained with me forever. We did learn foreign language, but mine was German, which helped me through the occupation. There was no English taught there, French or German. So I was exposed to German at the time. And we had wonderful social life after school hours.
You
Our
mentioned
school
to
was,
me you had some hobbies also.
Well, stamp collection and knitting. Knitting was very unpopular in those days, but my mother brought the knitting skill from Belgium, where she visited quite often as a child and even as an adult. So that's where she taught me. I remember to my brother's bar mitzvah, I wore a hand-knit dress that I made by myself. I was only 15 at the time. So here we are. Oh, our summers were always beautiful. Spent only 37 kilometers from Radom in pine woods, where we were renting a cottage every summer, and of course with my family and dear friends. With some survivors, I'm still in touch, especially one in Canada, Toronto. Called us here to Los Angeles, knowing that we would be here.
You also mentioned that you like to go skiing with your father.
Yes.
Can you remember, do you have any memories of?
Very fond memories, very, very, yes. Um, my mother never went to the mountains with my father because of the high altitude. She couldn't take it. So I was the one to be chosen to the eldest of three children, and I had my own skis, which eventually I had to stay in line to give to the German authorities. This I vividly remember. Other people would remember turning in their radios, which became illegal right at the beginning of the war, probably before the end of 1939. But I remember giving up my skis. Yes, these were beautiful, beautiful days.
Who were your friends at the time? What kind of other children were your friends?
Well,
were they all Jewish or was it mixed?
I would say they were basically Jewish, yes. Because we did have a lot in common. We're very similar background. Some more religious, some less, but still the same background. And very much the same age, within a year, give or take. And mostly girls. Although we had our place in the streets where we were walking after school and seeing boys, but this was secondhand stuff. It was not as important as keeping very close touch with our girls.
Now, you met your husband when you were a child, right?
I met my husband when I was already a teenager, perhaps 13. That's a teenager. My best friend was his first cousin. So I spent a lot of time with this girl, Lola Hirschenhorn. And since they lived in the same apartment building, of course, as first cousins, they were close. So we were meeting sort of in the street on the way to school. He was going to all-male school, different direction to mine, so he was tipping his little cap to me, because that was polite to do when you meet a girl whom you met before. So here we were. He belonged to the same Zionist organization as I did, being a year older. He was too sophisticated to be in the same group with us. My age. You know, only 1 year makes such a difference between the age of, let's say, 14 and 15. War broke out when I was 16. He was already 17. And then during the war, we were socializing. This was our only outlet to be, a few of us together.
Before the war, did you experience, as a younger child, any kind of anti-Semitism that
Yes.
you can remember?
Yes, I do. Very, very distinctly. I was going to school on Saturday without paper or pencil. I was just sitting in class. In fourth grade, we had, beginning of fourth grade, we had music lessons. It's theory, music theory, on Saturday and Monday. This particular year, Yom Kippur came on Saturday. None of us, of course. 8 Jewish girls did not come to school. This this teacher of music gave a lot of homework for Monday. We came to school on Monday unprepared for an obvious reason. Well, she really lashed us. She was very abusive to all of us. Well, during the pause, during intermission, recess, I should say, very indignant, all of us went to my mother. She has to do something for us about this issue. Well, she immediately got in touch with two mothers, and the three of them went to the principal and told them that this has to stop. They're not going to be Yom Kippur on Shabbat very often, but whenever it is, and the schedule is such, the roster calls for music lessons on the Sabbath, and then on Monday. Anyway, the teacher should not behave herself the way she did. I can't recall how this was changed, but I do remember that at the beginning of the war, just walking, there was no ghetto yet. My mother met this teacher in the street, said hello to her, and she stopped very abruptly, telling my mother, "You know what I can do to you now." And this was many years later. This was quite, you see how vivid it is after probably 60 years now. I even remember her name. Pani Kostrzewa. Pani means Mrs. So, and other little things that I'm sure happened. But we as children did not feel as much as our protective parents. Now, why didn't we leave? We were too established, just like many, many others.
When did you feel that things really started to change for you and your family?
Actually, it was very shortly before the outbreak of the war, which ironically is coming in 2 days. It was Friday, 56 years ago, Friday, September 1st. That's why I'm counting the day. I know that it's going to be this year, 1995, September 1st is on Friday. Perhaps 3-4 days prior to it, people were leaving summer vacation and coming home. And I don't think we, although I was just 16 years old, like 4 weeks prior to it, turned 16, I felt, didn't feel as much as my parents did and other parents. We had a very, very carefree summer. And then as I feel, September 1st is where our death decree, unknowingly to us yet, was issued.
Tell me more about September 1st and what followed after that.
Well, we were home already, and we children realized that school was not going to open for us, which would have been a Monday after Friday, so what was it, the 4th of September. The first thing was bombing of the city, probably other cities as well. There wasn't a lot of damage done, just enough to scare us. Of course, other towns and cities suffered much more. Bombing from German airplanes. And we had to stay in a shelter which wasn't man-made. It was just either under door posts or basements. It was very scary. But being an optimist in heart and probably surrounded by optimists, we just didn't think much of it. It's scary, but that's all it is. I don't remember Shabbat, 2nd of September. But Sunday there was much more activity. People were talking. What's next? Again, they tried to keep us children out of it. Bombing continued. On Wednesday, September 6th, September 5th, the day before, my father went to the Army recruiting service and asked, what's next for us young people? Could we leave town and go toward the east? They said, oh yes, we'll catch up with you there. So on Wednesday, the 6th of September, my uncles with their wives and children, my two uncles, my grandmother, and of course, the 5 of us left on a horse-drawn wagon. We put as much possessions as possible, plus food, and we were heading east, hoping that the Germans will be stopped on the way. Well, they were not. A lot of people were en route to Lublin, which was east of us. We were meeting a lot of similar wagons, horse-drawn wagons. Our driver was my father's cousin, bearing the same first name as my father, who was a sort of a professional driver, worked in the factory. And we were driving quite far over a burning wooden bridge over the Vistula River, day and night. We were driving on Shabbat, the following that after Wednesday. On Sunday, my father recognized, it was about 4 o'clock in the morning, he recognized also a horse-drawn but nicer wagon than ours. Mojitzer Rebbe with his sons. That's a dynasty of prominent rabbis. He left our wagon and just was on the steps of this rabbi. I said to him, Rabbi, I'm coming from Radom, my name is so-and-so. And we were driving on Shabbat. This man said, don't worry, so did we. We are running from an enemy. He blessed him. And I understand that this entourage got to Romania, and eventually from Romania were to Palestine or wherever. Now we were, as I said, going pretty far past Lublin, while my family met people coming back from these unoccupied territories. A lot of people got to the Russian part of Poland occupied by Russians. But they were telling us that there is disease there, a lot of sickness, and you have so many children on your wagon. Try to go back. Well, evidently they had a conference, the brothers and my father and the ladies, and they decided to turn around after 3 weeks of traveling. Our first stop was in Lublin, where my mother had a sister-in-law, very prominent lady. She participated in the Polish government, quite wealthy people. She visited her while leaving us behind and told her what we're doing here. And we have to rest a bit. This is a large city. Could we rest someplace? There wasn't talk about the hotel, of course, at the time, because they were already occupied. I'm sure they were occupied by the Germans 3 weeks later. She says, well, I could take your family in, but so many were 15 of us. I will try to find you a place. She did, at her close friends. And I remember till this day the name of this lady where all of us stayed, not with my aunt. Mrs. Block. Now, when I visited Israel, and I'm pretty close with my cousin, the only survivor of this particular family, he just turned 90 last November. He is an ophthalmologist who graduated or got his medical degree in Berlin in 1935. So, of course, we didn't meet him in 1939. He was in Palestine at the time already. I said, do you know of a lady by the name of Mrs. Block in Lublin? He said, that's my mother's best friend. Or she was his mother's best friend. So certain things stick to one's memory forever. Anyway.
What happened when you went back to Radom?
That's interesting. When we came back to Radom with the same wagon, the same people, the doors of our place was locked, was not vandalized. And the same went for my uncles and aunts' places. They were just untouched. But the factory was vandalized. There were piles of coal, hard coal, and soft coal. The soft coal remained, but the hard coal was all taken by people who needed it. It wasn't winter yet. But the stoves for cooking purposes were used, were fueled by coal, hard coal. And other things were taken, but they weren't as important as having our place back. But we heard what happened there when the Germans came in. It was very, very bad. In Radom itself, like they beat people. Didn't kill yet, but they were beating people, especially on Shabbat and then Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. They made people wash toilets with their talaisim. And they were really very, very abusive, with help of the local population. But we were lucky for a little while. My mother was a good, very smart organizer. Food was still available. It was quite, for at least 2 months. Well, it was only about a month after we returned. It was a relaxing atmosphere. But it started November 9th.
Diana, please continue. You were just saying about November 9th. This was still 1939?
That's still, yes, 1939. the authorities, German authorities. We didn't know much we couldn't differentiate between the Wehrmacht, which was the army in green uniforms, between them and SS, because they did not appear very uniform, so to speak. They could have worn the red band, armband on a regular suit yet, not necessarily uniform, which was very scary. A few weeks later, every week counted. They were arresting prominent people in the city. People, especially people who belonged to were part of the Council of Jewish Community. My father was one of them. So he was hiding at an aunt's house in a different section of the city. Nobody knew that he's there. And I'm sure that other people did the same thing. By this time, I was already attending a class to continue my education, which was interrupted by the war. A professor of Latin in our high school wanted to educate his son. So he formed a class of 4. We were 3 girls and as Vito, his son, more or less the same age. I think he was a little younger than I was. And we had a beautiful class of all subjects, history and social science and Latin, which was his favorite. Of course, he was professor of Latin. But this did not take long at all. I would say no more than 2 months, because eventually he was also arrested with his son. His son came back after a week and told us that his father was tortured to death. I was devastated. I loved the man. He was very, very wise and a wonderful teacher. So I lost this. And I was crying terribly. My father was going to Warsaw to visit it was still possible, to visit his sister and brother. And I remember he said goodbye to me, probably the others as well, but I remember his word, they're still ringing in my ears. Pray that this would be the first victim. You know it's the first victim of the war, but that he would be the last one. Well, he wasn't, obviously. Professor Schitzer. But I continued, actually, by myself, studying what he just left behind. But also part of this class was the English language. This man was never in England, but he told us about his professor who was English, was never in the States. And what he taught us was grammar, which remained with me till this day. I'm very sensitive to it, and I think it's pretty good.
Diana, what happened when Radom was established into a ghetto, and when did that happen?
Well, it was established in March of 1941. I know that other ghettos were established much earlier, like Warsaw and Lodz ghetto were established. But we had news from them. We knew how bad they were. So we knew that eventually it would come to us. But till then, we were still in our place, but the authorities were confiscating apartments, better places. So my mother managed to rent out, let two German officers live in 2 rooms of our place. And we just had a smaller place then. And they were okay to us. Just coming and going, basically. They weren't cooking, they weren't using the kitchen. So we were quite comfortable. What we benefited by, that radios were totally, completely illegal. I remember people standing in line to, just like I was mentioning before, my skis had to stay in line. There weren't many skiers in Radom, but there were also, we had to stay in line to give them away. Turn them in, would be the right expression. The same happened with radios. There was death penalty for finding a radio in anybody's possession. But one of the 2 officers, we saw later, he had a picture with Hitler himself. So he was quite an important person in the Nazi regime. He had a huge radio. The radio was standing on the windowsill. So all of us participated in listening. But how? I was the only one who understood the BBC, still from the professor, Schitzer. Actually, he was still alive when we invited him. It was in great secrecy, of course. Nobody would squeal on us. We were listening to this radio. There were tubes at the time, no other device, and tubes had to cool for a long time. So we had a board between the window and the radio, the glass panel and the radio, so we could remove and run with it. And then the tubes would not be seen in the evening outside the street. And we had guards on the steps. And my little brother, who was 7 years old at the time, was in the street watching if one of the officers not coming back. So he would signal upstairs, the 2nd floor. Well, by the way, this little boy was in the Mossad in Israel, and the first ambassador from Israel to Egypt. And he remembers it vividly, probably even better than I do. My uncles found out about this broadcast and the news we were giving them. And evidently, without thinking too hard, my uncle told it to his wife, and his 8-year-old daughters, twin girls, heard about it too, and then they repeated to my little brother. He came very, very angry home from wherever he was. He said, how can you do such a thing? How grown up are you that you tell Uncle Jacob, and Uncle Jacob told Aunt Sabina, and she told the little girls about it? You should know better. And my parents, of course, apologized to him for it. So that was quite an experience for us young people. Then we moved to the ghetto. Eventually, we moved to the ghetto, to a very small place, much smaller than ours before. We had to wear bands, white, with a blue Magen David on our left arm, unlike the yellow star in other places with the Yud on it. And sometimes when I want to do something, had to do something wrong, I took the band off because I could somehow manage to be non-Jewish. And I was never caught, lucky me. And here I am.
Who else did you live with anybody else when you were moved to the ghetto? You said you moved to a smaller
Well,
place.
we were, my grandmother lived with us. But occasionally she was going to her sons who lived quite in another ghetto. We had 2 ghettos in Radom. And my uncles somehow had to live there. That's another story. But so we were able to occasionally transfer my grandmother, who was old and sick, there for a few days, and then bring her back to us. But she always had her bed in our place. So we were, like my parents had a small, tiny room and bedroom that is, and my brother stayed with them, and 3 of us were in the living room, dining room, with a very tiny kitchen. And my father made all kinds of shelves where we could put things away. I remember above the entrance to the room, I think my brother still saw it when he visited this place, that right above the entrance, he put a big shelf, a wide shelf where things were stored. Eventually we lost this also.
Tell me a little bit more about the ghetto. What was your daily routine in the ghetto? What were you able to eat?
Well, there were working groups. People were led by Jewish policemen to various places of work. There was a huge ammunition factory, which probably employed thousands of people, Poles and Jews. Of course, the Poles were paid, Jews were not. But while being there, people were able to buy something from their co-workers and bring it back to the ghetto. The ghetto had several, actually I remember only 2 exits, entrance exits. The main one had a big gate, which was eventually destroyed when the ghetto was emptied. One was not, did not have a gate. It was manned by 2 or 3 Jewish policemen. So we were leaving at a certain time under guard, of course, of a Jewish policeman, and we were not to walk on the pavement, just the middle of the street. Everybody else did that way. There were times when there was shooting. People were killed for no reason at all, that they invented reasons for it, just to keep us very, very scared. And everybody tried to work outside of the ghetto. In our case, we were a group of perhaps 20. I can't recall the number, but I would think about 20. One of our co-workers just died 4 months ago here in Los Angeles. I was in touch with her. We were going to our factory, which was under German management. There were a lot of Polish employees there, of course, and the Jews were doing their jobs, the same jobs they were doing before the war, plus a few of us who were not there before the war. That included my mother, my aunts, were coming from another ghetto. And my uncles, my brother Nathan, probably the little one as well. Yes, yes, he was there. He got some special work that he could do. And being as young as he was, we decorated him. How? Put black like ashes on his face. He wore a big hat with a huge visor, like a midget, you know. And when some inspection came once from high authorities, they had a guide, a Polish guide there. And I said, what is this little guy doing here? Oh, you see how intelligent how he performs, how well he's doing his work. And he's Jewish. So let him work.
How old was he then?
He was 8. I remember his work. And all this statement I know from him, not because no one of us was there to witness it. Just he had to repeat it to us.
So you were, I'm sorry.
So we all found work there. I was working in the office. I was doing bookkeeping. We had two sets of books, one for the authorities and one for us. Why? Because they were partners, so we had to keep track of things. Even till this day, I have it in Philadelphia. I had a little 1942 calendar survived with me where I put certain figures as far as payments are concerned. Like I had a little garden in the ghetto on my best friend's little backyard. And I was buying seeds. So I have the prices of the seeds and what I bought in this little calendar. It wasn't easy. But as I repeat myself, the optimism kept us going. And the resourcefulness, I mean, as far as my family is concerned. Now, there were arrests constantly, but we were lucky. My father was not arrested. My uncles in the other ghetto were not. There were children born occasionally. We lost a little boy. My aunt and uncle, as my father's brother, youngest brother, and his wife, had a 7-year-old daughter. But all of a sudden, a baby was born to them, a baby boy. It was May of 1942. He died in July of 42 of meningitis. They were sitting Shiva in our place because he was buried from our place, not from their ghetto. After the Shiva, they returned home. August 5th, they were taken to Treblinka with their daughter. So here I have dates even of these happenings. Not all, but these I do.
Can you describe what the ghetto looked like?
It was the poorest, always the poorest section of the city. And Jews lived in these very poor sections of the city before the war as well. But there were flourishing businesses there. My grandfather had a wholesale sugar, flour, salt. No flour, I think, not salt and sugar in this future ghetto. That was way before the foundry. I just heard about it. Never saw the place. People lived, population of Radom was 100,000. There were about 32 to 35, I would say 30 to 32,000 Jews in the city, living everywhere. And then everybody had to be pushed into the ghetto. So there were two ghettos. The smaller one held 8,000 people. Ours was so much larger because there were people sent from smaller towns and villages. They wanted to concentrate Jews in one place. So there were a few ghettos probably throughout the occupied area. Like in Warsaw, people sent from their surrounding areas. So we had quite a large population.
But what did it look like? And
Oh,
what
well,
happened to
physically?
all the shops and, yeah.
People just had to be together. Few families lived in one place, in one apartment. There were apartments from all over, and somehow didn't hear of any murders there among Jews. Didn't hear of any beatings, any abuse. Really, we were quite well organized. I do remember in our sort of courtyard, across from our windows, looked into others above us, a hunchback who was very active in the community, was killed for no reason, just taken out, and was February of 1942. Very, not much sunlight, very damp, cold. We didn't complain about lack of fuel for some reason. It was wherever they were getting wood, no coal to heat the place. And just being that confined, that small, probably kept us warm enough, us and others.
What kind of food were you able to get?
Well, we were buying food from our co-workers, just like in other places. And there was some rationing where, I don't know where they were getting, probably, from peasants who were trying to get good money for it. But where did the money come from? People were just cooperating. People who were selling jewelry for food, milk for children. It seemed to me that at the beginning the Polish population was not as adverse to it. They didn't want us to be wiped out the way we later turned out to be. And just the residents were very helpful to each other. Like when I grew my little vegetable garden before going out from the ghetto to work, it was for whoever needed it. Of course, just the immediate neighbors and my family and my girlfriends. And that kept us busy, reading, socializing with my husband and his friends, and my girlfriend and our mutual friends.
Was there ever any talk of your family trying to get out of the ghetto?
No, absolutely not. We thought any day this is going to come to an end. We did not expect the outcome that really happened, no. Now it's going to end. We're going to go back to school. Everybody's going to be back to normal. Everything's going to be back to normal. And the enemies will be punished. And there were a few enemies among our people, which turned out later they were planted people. Planted. Actually, even before the ghetto, there were a few I remember myself, but I'm sure there were more than a few that were like students in Germany, and they spoke a perfect German. My mother befriended still in our our apartment. She befriended a lady who turned out later was a German spy, a young, pretty girl. That's when the bombing started. She could have been the one who said, you're going to bomb here and there. With a Polish passport or whatever ID she had. I don't recall her name precisely now, but we knew her well. So we did not expect the outcome.
Tell me about when you left the ghetto for Warsaw. How did that all come about?
No, much happened. Much happened before. We knew already that Warsaw is under siege, in parentheses, quotation marks. We knew what's going on in Warsaw, but not as bad as it really happened because of the family we had there, who eventually perished. It was August 5th, 1942, when two Jewish policemen came middle of the night, no, before the night yet, took my father to the community center. He was a member of this group, still from before the war. And it turned out that they took about 30 men from this ghetto to the small ghetto, or around the small ghetto, outside of the small ghetto, to dig graves. But we didn't see my father. Well, in the morning, I would say about 5 or 6 a.m., shooting, banging, rouse, out of our homes. Most people left with nothing on their backs, in nightgowns and pajamas, toward this place, the largest sort of, what would I call it, square in the ghetto. That's where usually the ware used to be sold. People with wagons were coming, horse-drawn wagons, to sell their farm products. So this became the so-called Umschlagplatz, which the word was used in the Warsaw ghetto, Umschlagplatz. We were chased from our place. Not every street in this large ghetto was even awakened by them, but we were. And our city rabbi, who lived in the same building, was carrying on his back, I turned my head and I saw, he was carrying a few belongings, probably his religious articles. Pardon?
Okay, please continue what you're saying. You saw the rabbi and he had all his belongings.
The rabbi was holding in his sheet, white sheet, probably his religious articles, plus whatever else, going toward the same Umschlagplatz as my mother, my little brother, and I. We somehow lost my brother Nathan for the moment. We were, of course, chased by SS people. When we came there was a selection. Who would go to the trains and who would remain in the ghetto. But again, I underscore, not the whole large ghetto was sent to this place. Their time came a few days later. This was only to take enough people to fill the trains to Treblinka. They did empty the small ghetto already. They took 7,000 people earlier that same day. 1,000 men came to our ghetto. Among them was my Uncle Jacob only. But now he again had to be here on this Umschlagplatz in the large ghetto. So my aunts and their children and my Uncle Leib went to Treblinka. My grandmother, who happened to stay with them there, was probably killed right there on the spot and buried in the grave that these men from our ghetto were digging. Somebody even said that they said that my twin cousins are too beautiful to be Jewish. But this was just hearsay. So either they went out to Treblinka or they were killed there also. They were 11 years old at the time. I have their picture. Now, my mother and I, were sent as workers to the good side. We were to stay still in Radom. But as we were running, someone said, we both heard it, aber ohne Kinder, which means you cannot go, you have to leave the little boy behind. We would go one way and he would go the other. But we somehow managed to take him to the front of us, and we eventually got back home, which was not to be a home too long. Then my father appeared, and he said that he saved Nathan, my brother. And my uncle also returned, so we were again intact, at least part of. My immediate family was. But we knew that's not the end, so we tried to somehow remain outside of the ghetto. We managed to stay in the factory and hiding there for the night, working during the day. The little boy and my mother were hidden on an attic of one of workshops in the factory. My future husband saw, following Sunday, huge night lights being brought to the ghetto. He thought, that's it. They're going to have an action again. He'll tell you where he was in the meantime, but that was August 16th. He didn't even remember it was his birthday. He took his mother and two siblings and his stepfather to the ammunition factory. They didn't want to stay there. Mother didn't want to stay there. She came back to the ghetto. She was sent away August 18th with her family. Anyway, he'll talk about it later. We survived this action intact. And eventually, after probably 2 weeks, a new ghetto was formed. Much, much smaller because only 2,000 people survived out of 30-some. And again, working from there and running and hiding and whenever we thought an action is coming. So we survived several actions, which at this point I probably won't be telling you anymore. There was one January 13th, 1943, there was a list prepared for people who have relatives in Palestine. These people sort of remained and others were sent again to Treblinka. So we were again decimated. These factory jobs were eliminated. Eventually, the ammunition factory and shops became a KZ, which is a concentration camp. No comparison with Auschwitz or other camps in Germany or the death camps in Poland, because we were able to work. Like I was digging turf for a few weeks. My future husband got me out of that turf digging and took me to got me to the shops where I became a dressmaker under a prominent dressmaker in Radom. This didn't take very long, looked like forever, but didn't take too long. In the meantime, back in beginning of 42, there was a registration of people from Poland, from Radom, to Palestine. Several people registered, probably several, more than several, about 60-some people registered. People who had husbands there, sons, daughters, whoever. Among them was a very close friend of my parents, who had a husband, parents, sisters, brothers. She was the only one who remained in Poland because she was married and had 3 children, about my parents' children's ages. Their daughter was in Warsaw, in the ghetto, working. She had to make a living for her 2 sons, and my parents were helping her quite a bit. Well, when the extermination action came, she was in Radom. She survived this, and she was working on a Baustelle, which is a building construction company for whatever. Everything without pay, obviously. So her son, who was about 16, 17, was working. Her little boy, who was 12, could not be employed, obviously. So he was just staying in the room. When she went out to work, he was taken away from her. A call came to our ghetto, Radom ghetto. It's very small, there were 2,000 people. There was no one to let anybody know. People were busy with other things. The list was there. These people are requested to come forth. They are going to Palestine. Well, everybody was very dubious. Who is going to send us to Palestine? Well, it was true. 14 people only went because the others were already exterminated or sent to their death would be a better way of expression. This lady, Mrs. Grauher, Golda Grauher, who had only 1 son left, hoping that her daughter from Warsaw would join her eventually. My parents knew that she was not in Warsaw anymore, but they kept quiet. She asked my parents she would like to take our little boy with her. I remember he was sitting, eating on a chair, and he says, I will go, and wiggling his shoulders. I will go. He went, and he was saved at the age of 10. He arrived in Palestine, and we heard about it. That's why I'm stretching this, because I feel it's so important. Say how many children could have been saved somehow, and 1.5 million perished, his age, younger and older. Well, we were lucky that we found out that they wrote to us, to our Polish, actually to the factory. This postcard came from Istanbul, Turkey. He left the ghetto October 28th, and November 15th, they wrote a postcard from Istanbul that they are on the way to Palestine. There was also a postcard from Vienna before, a few days probably before that this Golda Grau, her hopes that her daughter would join her from Warsaw Ghetto. And my parents just looked at each other. Later, I found out, had they told her that her daughter would probably never join them, she would have probably asked for my going with her. But they just didn't want to do that. So that's this paragraph. Eventually, I was working in the shops in the dressmaking department. My mother was working in a laundry inside the ghetto. My father, uncle, and brother were working in the shops. My uncle was working in a printing shop, everything for the authorities, nothing for the Jews. And my brother Nathan and my father were working on basket making, very important for whatever. Eventually we heard that this little ghetto will be liquidated because it already became a KZ, a concentration camp. So we managed through customers in Warsaw. Polish people were coming to the factory, still buying items for their needs. They made falsified IDs for all of us. Well, my mother and I escaped from the ghetto first with a Polish wonderful man who turned out to be Jewish. We thought after his death, we didn't know that he was Jewish. He was tortured to death.
Was there a fake name you used on your papers?
We did, yes. My name was Janina Dobrzańska, which was a slight only change from my mother's maiden name. And my mother was Helena Dobrzańska. As it turned out, our papers were a little misprinted, that she was, well, I don't remember exactly why. Anyway, that she was my father's sister, a spinster, who raised me because I had no mother, because he put it like not married, my mother's, whatever. And we arrived in Warsaw, the two of us first. Why in Warsaw? Because in a large city, it's easier to get lost, to get, unknown, be free to do without being traced. So we lived with a Polish family, paid them handsomely. Until our money ran out, we tried to rent a place of our own, which we managed, and we lived very inexpensively. Now, eventually, a few weeks later, my father, my brother, and my uncle also escaped their work and their camp in Radom, where they did all their doings. They could not be as open as we were, because for women much easier, for circumcised men it was impossible. Poles are not circumcised. So they were in hiding and had to pay very, very handsomely for their bed and breakfast. Until an opportunity came for them to go to unoccupied Hungary. That was, again, this wonderful guide took them from Warsaw to Krakow, and from Krakow another guide was to take them to the Hungarian borders. And there, being free, they could have gone to Palestine or England or wherever. But unfortunately, they left Christmas Eve, when all the authorities are drunk.
What year was this?
1943, Christmas Eve. We took them to the train, and they all went, 4 of them. Now, there were 4 more people who went with them under the supervision of this guide. Unfortunately, they landed in Plaszów concentration camp with things on their backs that they are escapees, so everybody would know that they are, on their clothing, that they are escapees, that they could run again. Well, they never did. But when an opportunity came up, they went to a place called Mielec, where there was also a concentration camp, airplane factory. So they worked there until they were shipped to Flossenburg concentration camp. There my father died 2 months before liberation, while my uncle, my brother were at work. So when they came back from work, his body was cremated. He was gone. What we do have is his death date, and we do have this. Eventually, my future husband organized, well, I was in touch with him through other people, through this guide, Michael Komar, who was tortured to death in Plaszów because they wanted to get information from him. Who else is in Warsaw that he knows of, that he would be bringing, like he brought these people here to Warsaw, and then they landed in Plaszów. He would not squeal. He would not mention a name. And they made his wife buy ammunition in Warsaw so they would free him. But they never freed him, and they tortured her to death as well.
Can you tell me the story that you told me about the woman in Warsaw that you had originally stayed with?
We thought they were very, very sincere people. So we were telling them all about our past, immediate past. There were very small quarters. There were 3 rooms and a kitchen there. But for money, they condensed. So the mother, a widow, whose husband was a customer of my father and his brothers, and they had a Jewish partner in their business in Warsaw. The Jews were in the ghetto, and they were, of course, non-Jews. We were paying them handsomely. So when we left them for our new, very inexpensive apartment, by the way, the place that we rented was empty for 2 years. The reason why it was empty was because there was a grandmother, daughter, and 2 grandchildren who were running a illegal printing press, and it was discovered by the Nazis. So they were, well, the grandmother and the mother were killed under the ghetto walls. They were not Jewish. The children were in Majdanek. The place was controlled for a few weeks. Somebody was sitting there. If a beggar knocked at the door, he was arrested. So the place was empty, as I say, for 2 years. Nobody wanted to live there. But when the administrator of the house, of the building, felt that it's safe, he started to advertise for renters. And we answered his ad, and we rented it because we checked with someone, an advisor, a distant relative of ours, non-Jew. He said, look, after 2 years it's safe, and you know all about it. Why don't you take the risk? Well, that's where we stayed. Eventually, we were in touch with the people, but normally people did not share their address. There were no telephones at the time. Their address, their last names. I was known as Janina, but nobody knew my last name. So they gave me a nickname, whoever I used to meet, our people. They called me the Gray One, because I used a lot of gray clothing, a lot. Whatever I had, my coat was gray, winter coat. They called me Gray, the Gray One. The Germans were already, the army was retreating from Stalingrad and Russian area. And they were going through Warsaw. Things weren't, this was already July of 44. Things weren't as quiet as they were before, although there was no tranquility in Warsaw because the Polish underground worked very, very hard. They wanted to beat the enemy with their bare hands, practically. Our landlord knocked at our door on a Sunday morning. My mother went to open the door. I was getting dressed. It was quite early in the morning. He says, I have to share something with you ladies. What is it? Well, I got an anonymous phone call from a woman who said, you should do something about these residents in this apartment. These 2 women are not Aryan. They are not Christian. Who are you? She wouldn't tell him, but he felt it's his obligation to come and tell us about it. Well, my mother got frantic. She really played her role beautifully. I heard it in the other room. Who in the world would do such a thing? How dare they do that? So I am just getting ready to go to church. My daughter is getting ready to go to church. Well, I am here just to share this information with you. He was very gentle, very nice person. Unfortunately, I don't remember his name. We, obviously, we're very upset. What are we going to do now? Should we run and burn all the bridges behind us? We were advised not to. Stay put. Well, the same phone call was repeated to him, and he again came to warn us. It took a few weeks. Someone knocked at our door again. It wasn't he. It was this woman, the daughter of the elderly person who took us in on Kościelna 25, quite a while prior to this mishmash in the city. And she said, I just walked by, and I wanted you to be warned that it's not quiet in the street, so you would be better off staying at home. And that's when we realized who did the squealing. So you couldn't even trust your friends. Now, what was on her mind was probably, come running back to us. She knew the Jewish philosophy, sort of, at the time. You would be running. Where would you be running? Back where it was safe. And you again pay all this big money to them, which we didn't have. That was this time of our lives. Now, we were also, while there, we somehow learned that there is Yom Kippur coming up that day. We were fasting. 2 days later, we found out it wasn't the right day. So we had to redo it again, just to keep the tradition. Times were so bad. One thing I know, we did not wear crosses, where we knew Jewish women especially, who had dyed their hair, bleached, because that was safe, and they felt better. But we never did. Occasionally, walking by a church, only occasionally, we had to cross ourselves, or separate. But what made us fulfilled, I won't say happy, that we were able to help 3 men. We were not able to help my father, my uncle, my brother anymore. We knew that they were caught and away. But my future husband, his cousin, and a friend of theirs came to Warsaw, and they were totally, completely under our supervision, my mother's and mine. And about July, that what I was telling you before about the German army already retreating from the Russian area, Poles were caught. She was right. Poles were caught in the street to dig shelters or whatever was required of us as Poles. So we had to be very careful, but we knew it anyway without her warning. In July, they were bombing of Russians and Germans on Warsaw. Warsaw was divided into 2 cities by the Vistula River. So my 3 men were living across the Vistula from us. That's the area that was liberated by the Polish army under Russian supervision, under Russian authority, much earlier than ours.
You were telling me that your future husband had come to Warsaw, and what were the events that followed? They were under your supervision.
Well, yes. Well, this really he would remember better than I do. We were constantly busy helping them out with various things. Um, Once, I was very instrumental in saving 2 lives out of 3. Couldn't save the third one. They had to leave their place because they were living on the Vistula River, very close to anyway. And a high dignitary, German dignitary, was killed by the underground, and his body was in big to-do ship by the river, on the river to wherever, Danzig or... the whole population had to be emptied out from this area. They were afraid of some sabotage on the Vistula River. That included the place where these 3 men lived. They didn't know Warsaw. They couldn't call anybody to take them anywhere, but somehow they managed with one of the women who lived in this apartment, and well, of course they had to find a place to be. So my husband remembered an address where my father and my uncle, my brother, were staying for a little while. They also knew that it was a bad place to stay. No one was ever killed there, but this woman was wonderful. She accepted anybody who wanted to stay in her apartment and pay her a certain fee. Well, they were there for a couple days. Then, instead of going back, the 2 men, his cousin and their friend, had an opportunity to arrange their trip to Hungary, in which I did not want to have a hand in, because I knew how disastrous my father's, uncles, and brothers' trip to Hungary was. But they found somebody in this place who was to arrange for them. And they did not want to go back at the time. Well, my husband will elaborate on it closer. He was a hero at the time. But I came there on a February late rush hour. People are returning home from work. I said, you have to go back with me right now. She wants you there. You have to go back. No, he cannot go because somebody is coming whom he has to meet to arrange the trip to Hungary. But I insisted so hard that at least one of you, one stay and one go back. So his cousin was going back with me and Murray. We came to as far as the trolley car, which was very close. Not a station wagon, a truck came with Germans on it. I think they were probably Gestapo and Ukrainians. Came to the apartment. There were a few women there. They let the women out. They killed 2 men. One was our friend, right under the window. And one happened to be a nephew of this Michael Komar, who was the guide. That's when we probably found out that this Komar was a Jew. Anyway, I dropped them off, these 2, the old place near the Vistula River, and I went back to my mother. I wasn't there for a few hours. It turned out that the man that they waited for to take them rather than I take them, Ludwig, came Snow White to them, telling them, your friend is dead. Anyway, that's this tragic story, a saving of these 2 lives. Had they been there, they would have met the same goal.
So what happened then until the time you were, was this right before you were liberated? When was this in relation to when?
This was February of 43, 44, 44. They arrived in January 44, and this happened February 44.
Okay. You mentioned that you,
Eventually, toward the end of the year, when the German army was retreating, they lived in another place then. They lived across the Vistula River, the two of them. I had their money, and I was bringing it once a week, their payment for their keep, because we heard rumors that people who had money on them were killed, because why keep a Jew when I can have my freedom? I mean, people were risking, but for a handsome fee. Why not kill them and have their money that they had on them? So everybody knew, their landlord, their people who kept them, that I'm not Jewish, and I am just a benefactor. I'm bringing the fee for them, their money, which I did. And we were very friendly with their hosts until their money ran out, our money ran out. And bombing started, and everybody had to go to the shelters. Well, they couldn't go to the shelters because their hosts would not let them. What's going to happen if a bomb hits them and kills them? Everybody's going to find out in the building that they are Jewish. You better leave this place, not knowing that there is no money available. So my mother suggested that they come to us and stay with us. She borrowed some money and bought some stuff, some meat and bread. That's all this money yielded for. Within a week, which was September 1st, no, August 1st, the Polish uprising started. It lasted till October 2nd. We were all free, Jews, non-Jews, but a lot of Jews were killed at the time, not by Germans, but by a so-called Armia Krajowa, which was the People's Army, Polish People's Army. They started the uprising. They wanted to liberate Warsaw rather than the Russian army liberate Warsaw. That's when Warsaw was demolished within these few weeks, or 2 months, and all Poles remaining there were sent out from Warsaw. Well, we remained, and we were 4 women and 2, my mother and I, and 2 strange women, and 4 strange men, 2 strange men to our men, who built this bunker under a demolished apartment building on Sienna 23. A lot of bunkers, so they prepared water for a month. Our hiding lasted 3.5 months.
and do you remember the date you were liberated?
Liberated, yes, January 17th, 1945.
You were liberated from the bunker?
Yes. A woman who had, a Polish woman had a Jewish husband, son, non-Jewish son, Jewish son, and a daughter in another bunker. And they discovered us, and they helped us a great deal, because they were people who lived in Warsaw before the war. this woman came from outside. Said, "Get up, lazy bones. You are free." And that was daytime. We turned day into night. We slept during the day and we lived during the night. The men were going out and finding some food or whatever. And these people, the permanent residents of Warsaw, were helping our men. From 8 people, we became 24 because other bunkers were destroyed by either workers there or Germans who were coming to loot. So we took them in. There was plenty of space there. Just come and be yourself. My friends, whoever, could have been my husband or other men, found some wool there, just outside, and knitting needles. I was knitting a beautiful sweater, which I still have in Philadelphia. It's not wearable because eaten up by moth, but I have it as a memento. When I was knitting, I was sure it's pink. It turned out it was gold. Color was like between orange and yellow, gold.
Where did you go after you were liberated?
We walked, or we stayed there. This was probably the only warm place. Why was it warm? Because it was after fire, so it kept very warm in the basement. We stayed there for a few days, and then we started to walk. A man found some abandoned cans of food and bread, whatever, abandoned by the Germans. Brought it down to us, to the basement, to the bunker. We crawled out of a space as big as this table, probably. And snow was yellow in our eyes because of no light. But eventually our sight was restored. That's why I say about the sweater, the color of the sweater. We got to Radom, and we thought we can establish our lives back home in our hometown. I started school under my old falsified name because I knew that the principal would not accept a Jewish person to the school. I had an example of it. A Jewish girl went and she asked her, "What children will you teach?" This was a pedagogic lyceum. "What children would you be teaching after you finish our school?" Meaning there are no more Jewish children there. Anyway, I went to school. I was there only 2 months when we have to flee Radom. We were chased, actually. And to prove to us that they mean business, local people, was they killed a Russian officer, a Jew, a young newlywed couple who just came back from a camp, concentration camp, and a tailor who probably also came from a concentration camp. Eventually I met somebody who lived upstairs, a Jewish person who died in Philadelphia. My husband was coming back from work, and we weren't married at the time. He saw a group of people standing there. He wanted to know what's going on. And he overheard a young child asking her mother, "What happened here, Mama?" She said, "Oh, nothing, dear child. They just butchered some Jews there." He walked away, of course. So that was to prove to us that we just have to leave. We left with my uncle who, see, my mother went to Germany. She heard that a Gottlieb and a son survived someplace in Bavaria. So my mother somehow managed. She was very resourceful, young. She went to Germany, and while there sitting in a bus, she saw my brother on a bicycle, my brother Nathan. with a black band on his hand. This was style of mourning, expression of mourning. So she knew already that it was my father who died. So she stayed with them for a few days, and my uncle and my mother returned to Poland. My brother stayed in Regensburg. My mother, they came back to see what they can do about the factory. Nothing happened. Then we, all of us, were going back to Germany, to where my brother and my uncle lived. They received my mother when she came there. We left everything behind, whatever we were able to retrieve. Wasn't our furniture, it was my uncle's furniture that we lived on. And my mother was so wonderful. She opened our doors, meager doors, to a girl, a young girl who came back by herself from a concentration camp, not knowing that her sister was liberated to Sweden. Eventually she joined her. And no one else came back to Radom, although we checked. So that was this episode. We had to smuggle our way back to, not back, but to Germany, to Bavaria, through Czechoslovakia, with a lot of thorns on our way, but we got there. My uncle was a chairman of the, we call him president, chairman of the Jewish community in Regensburg. A lot of refugees were coming back. After a while, we counted 2,000 souls. We lived outside of a DP camp. There was a DP camp close by, but it was occupied by non-Jews, mostly escapees from their home communities. There were Ukrainians, Lithuanians, Poles. And having the knowledge of English, I became an interpreter for two women from Australia, no, from New Zealand, who worked for the UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Agency. They only spoke English. They didn't know any German or Polish. So I was their interpreter, only for a short while, only because I couldn't take inoculating and being around these, our enemies.
How long did you stay in Regensburg for?
We were in Regensburg from September 45 till June 47, when our quota came up to come to the United States. We would have wanted to go to Palestine, but we would have had to go, the two of us would have had to go illegally. The mandate, British mandate, did not issue certificates too freely. My mother received one because she had a minor son there. She never reached Palestine. But we came to the United States ready to deliver a baby boy.
What happened to your mother?
My mother met her death in a transit camp. She was hit by a British army truck driven by a Ukrainian driver. He hurt her badly enough. She died 17 days later. That was June 7th. She died June 24th. We arrived in this country June 22nd, not knowing that she was dead. My brother Nathan had difficulty burying her, but he did find a place in Bergen-Belsen on the old cemetery, put up a beautiful matzeva, a tombstone. And 31 years later, we transferred her remains to Mount of Olives in Jerusalem.
When did you get married?
We got married end of 45, December 30th, 45, in Germany. Witnesses were my uncle, my brother, and a very dear friend of the family, especially my uncle's a rabbi who lives in New York.
So you came to America June 22nd, 1947.
Yes.
Where did you go? Where did
We
you stay?
stayed for 1 week in New York, in Brooklyn, with my husband's aunt and uncle and their offsprings. Only for a week because actually we knew that we have family in Philadelphia and they requested our coming. Actually, they sent papers for my mother, my brother, my uncle, who was their first cousin. My uncle came 2 years later to Philadelphia. He died 3.5 months later of a stroke, leaving a wife and 20-month-old son.
Tell me about your children. How many do you have?
I have 3 children. My son Leo was born 8 weeks after our arrival here, prematurely. 7 months baby. My son Alan was born September 28, 1951, and our daughter was born June 28, 1957. 2 out of 3 are married, 2 out of 3 have children.
How many grandchildren do you have?
We have 6 grandchildren, 4 of our son and daughter-in-law, Judith. There are 3 daughters, Yael, Eitan, Batya, and Leora. Our daughter lives in Denver with her husband Kevin. They have Jeffrey and Jeremy.
Is there any messages you would like to deliver about your experiences in the Holocaust?
Well, we never held anything back, good, bad, or in between, never. Of course, answering questions. The firstborn, obviously, was more interested because he was almost born in Germany, but I would not. And I was lucky enough not to give birth on the German soil. He knew a lot, and he wrote about it in essays and whatnot. My message would be never to forget. It's our motto. From the beginning to the end, it will always be it.
Thank you, Diane.
You're welcome. My grandfather, Eli Gottlieb, first picture taken in 1920 in Radom, Poland. Second one, he's 10 years. I'd like to correct it. I would like to correct the picture was taken in 1930 of my grandfather, Eli Gottlieb. My grandmother, Rochma Gottlieb. Picture was taken in 1938, in her summer place in Garbatka, Poland.
Where is she in the photograph?
She's on the extreme right.
Thank you.
My father, Eliezer, on the extreme right, on the bottom row. My mother, Helena Gottlieb, next to him. Picture taken in 1928 in Radom, Poland. This picture was taken summer of 1936. I am surrounded by my 2 brothers. Brother Nathan is on the right-hand side, Brother Eliyahu on the left.
Where was it taken?
It was taken in Radom, Poland. My picture Diana Weinstock, Gottlieb, was taken in 1940 in Radom, Poland.
Was this in the ghetto?
Yes, it was taken in the ghetto.
Thank you.
This is a picture of my twin cousins. At the age of 10, Pepka and Dorka Gottlieb, at a very leisure time, 1938,
Where?
in Rapka, Poland, at a summer place.
Thank you.
Happy days. My husband Murray Weinstock and I, Diana Weinstock, attending the wedding of our son in Los Angeles, California, June 1975.
Which son got married?
Alan Hilliard Weinstock.
Thank you.
Leo Weinstock, our firstborn, with his niece, Leora Weinstock, 1992 in Los Angeles, California. Happy picture of our son, Alan Weinstock, his wife, Judith Weinstock, their daughter, Yael Weinstock. Eitan Weinstock is their only son, and Alan is holding Batya Weinstock in 1988.
And where was it taken?
It was taken in their home in Los Angeles, California.
Thank you.
Leora Weinstock is the youngest daughter of our son and daughter-in-law, Alan and Judith Weinstock. This picture was taken in 1995. She's almost 4 years old and was taken in Los Angeles, California, in their home. Our daughter, Elaine Ann Weinstock Kaufman, with her husband, Kevin Kaufman, and their son, Jeffrey Kaufman. They live in Denver, Colorado, and that's where this picture was taken in 1983. This is Jeremy Kaufman. Picture was taken shortly after his birth, June 17th, 1995, in Denver, Colorado. Son of Elaine and Kevin Kaufman.
You wanted to make a correction to the last photograph?
Yes, I would like to make a correction in the date. Jeffrey and his parents, Kevin and Elaine Kaufman, was taken in 1986.